Hadir di ballroom untuk melaksanakan agenda selanjutnya, yaitu kita menuju plenary session 1. Namun sebelum kita menuju ke plenary session 1, kita terlebih dahulu akan mendengarkan bersama keynote speech oleh Ketua Umum Pengurus Besar Nahdlatul Ulama. Kepada yang terhormat, Kiai Haji Yahya disilahkan.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, syukurullah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulullah Sayyidina Maulana Muhammad ibn Abdullah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi mawala. Honorable Eminences, Excellencies, Venerables, Dignitaries, ladies and gentlemen, these days we all feel sad to see the conflicts that are still going on in many places in the world, and that many of those conflicts bring religion as an element. And even in many of the conflicts that is happening, religion is function as a weapon or as a base of group consolidation against others. And we feel sad about that now, and we feel that it is absolutely inappropriate to use religion in that way. The thing is, ladies and gentlemen, some decades ago, maybe a century ago, or some centuries before, in the era of our grandfather, our great-grandfather, because I can see that most of us here were born not longer than maybe 70, 60, 70 years ago. But our grandfathers and our great-grandfathers, they experienced a time, an era, where conflicts were normal. They experienced an era when it was normal to use religion as the base of conflict. We can see in history, for centuries and even for thousands of years, human beings engage in identity conflicts against each other, and each group consolidate on the base of religion. We also know from history that there was an era in human civilization that destroying each other, enslaving each other were normal. Disregarding the rights of others was normal back in that time. And even the discourse in our respective religion saw that it was normal back then. In Islam, for example, back in the Middle Age, the discourse was seeing others as subject of suspicion, subject of discrimination, and even enmity. And it was there in the religious discourse. And I would guess that the same case also with the other religion, the discourse in all religion. Since this construct of the law of the jungle in the past, when the powerful can just destroy the powerless, exploit the powerless without any objections from any direction. We know from history that construct then led to a great global catastrophe. The world experienced two great wars, the World War I and the World War II, which took unprecedented casualties as the cost of the war. In the World War I, there were more than 21 million lives were lost. And in the World War II, approximately 85 million lives. With this tragedy then, thanks to God, the international leaders were thinking about the need for a consensus to end the threat of this kind of conflicts. That's how they achieved this international consensus by signing a charter in 26th of June 1945 in San Francisco that then is called the United Nations Charter, and followed by the activation of United Nations Organization. And shortly after that, in 1948, followed with UN resolution on Universal Declaration of Human Rights. All these consensus were meant to end the catastrophe caused by conflicts and wars. Religions or religious leaders were not too much involved in the initiative for those consensus, those international consensus. When the UN Charter was signed in 1945, it was the political leaders and none of religious leaders involved. And until now, even, there is no religious leaders invited to join the signing of this charter, this very important charter. And maybe because of that, then, it's been so slow that religions internalize or adopt the principles that have been consented by international leaders, international political leaders, with this charter and UDHR resolution. But because of this consensus and the efforts by international community to promote it all this time, that the principle of peace and harmony and justice and equal dignity among human beings then are mostly accepted by our global society. And because of that, then now we share like a new feeling about conflicts and the function of religion and the interaction between different groups, and align with the principle and the consensus, which is equal dignity, compassion, justice, harmony, and so forth. But because these ideas are not yet settled or integrated into the authoritative discourse of our religion, then we still see up until now group of religion, group of people using religion as the justification, as the reason to wage enmity and conflict and communal hatred against each other. I told you before, Indonesia has been famous as a country of tolerance and harmony under the principle of Bhinneka Tunggal Ika, as mentioned by His Excellency President Jokowi this morning. Unity amidst diversity. But just a couple of days ago, 2 days ago, on the evening of Saturday, it was happened that a group of Muslims clashed with a group of Christians in one part of this country, in Bitung. And the issue that triggered the clash, the conflicts, was this Israeli-Palestinian problem. So it was a conflict between a group of pro-Palestinian Muslims against pro-Israeli Christians. So there are still people who want to bring religion into conflict like this. And they truly feel that it is a religious obligation, according to whatever they understand from the respective religious teachings, that they are obliged to engage in such conflicts against the other side. So my point is that we are still facing a big challenge here. if we want a solution for all this ongoing conflict that still happening here and there, Middle East, in Sub-Sahara, in Europe, and so forth, everywhere in the world, any solution would need a framework for it. What would be the framework for solution? Something that makes, any strategy, any efforts workable, doable, and decisive, can reach a decisive result. If you look at what we have now, we can see actually we already have in our hands an existing framework all this time, which is the new international consensus after the World War II, namely the United Nations Charter, United Nations Organization, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It can be the framework, and it is workable if then everybody, every actors involved in these international affairs would really consistent in implementing the principles in this consensus, would really consistent in applying this consensus in our international affairs. The fact that we are still seeing problems keep going on up until now because there are still some actors in the global dynamics that have the interest to disregard or even undermine the principles in this international consensus. So the way I see it, what we need now is a strategy to strengthen this framework, this already existing framework. How we can work to push all the actors involved in international affairs to truly abide by this consensus. Well, as religious leaders, as the bearers of religious authorities, we may say that this consensus was initiative coming from beyond religious environment. It was the political leaders who made the consensus, not the religious authorities. But I would say it is absolutely easy for us, from the perspective of our religion, our respective religion, whatever religion it is, that the principles that were consented by these international political leaders actually are in line with our beliefs, in line with the principles, the fundamental teachings of our religion. Because we know that religion, our religion, are not just about the right God against the false God. Religion is not just about the right beliefs against the wrong beliefs. But religion is also about a grace to help human beings to manage their lives into a better and more noble condition. So since the principles that are consented in this international consensus are meant to start a new order that will enable human civilization to work together toward a better and more noble condition, then I believe it is easy for us to agree also that these are all in line with the fundamental teachings of our religion. And looking at the situation, the need, the desperate need of our international community to see a path towards solutions, then I would say it is our responsibility as religious leaders, as the bearers of religious authority, to mobilize whatever resources in our hands, as long as our hands can reach, to mobilize toward the strengthening of the framework that we already have as international consensus, to strategize the decisive actions toward solutions. This gathering today is meant for us not just to articulate our feelings, not just to spread messages, not just to proselytize the beautiful teachings of our religion, but we have in mind when we initiate this gathering that we want to see a true desire to act, a true desire to act and to act together among religious leaders and authorities, because it is also under the responsibility of religions to see a better fate for the future of human civilizations. Thank you. Wallahul muwaffiq ila aqwamit thoriq. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Kiai Haji Yahya Khalid Saquf. All right, well, the next agenda, we are moving on to the plenary session 1 with the topic preserving and strengthening the post-World War II global consensus that serve as the foundation of a rules-based international order. And we would like to invite our moderator for this session, Mr. Timothy Shah from Center for Shared Civilization Value.
Selamat pagi, Assalamu alaikum. Greetings of peace and grace. God bless you. I'm Timothy Shah, Director of Strategic Initiatives for the Center for Shared Civilizational Values. It is my great honor and privilege to continue the discussion that we began as we gather this morning for the R20 International Summit of Religious Authorities, ISORA, religion's role in addressing Middle East violence and threats to a rules-based international order. I'm going to make a few remarks as we begin our plenary session, which is entitled Preserving and Strengthening the Post-World War II Global Consensus that Serves as the Foundation of a Rules-Based International Order. This is going to be a panel discussion with distinguished religious authorities gathered from around the world, and I'm going to ask those who are participating in this panel to come forward now and take your seats. I'm going to ask Dr. Kyle Wisdom, César Rosselló, Imam Talib Shareef, Reverend Raymond De Souza, Dr. Jacqueline Rivers, and all the other members of the panel to come forward, including Bishop Dapo Asaju, Imam Yahya Pallavicini, Dr. Walter Ratliff, Ms. Zainab Al-Suwaij, and Dr. James Dorsey. Please take your seats and welcome. I'm especially grateful that these distinguished authorities, religious leaders, scholars, journalists have traveled long distances on very short notice to join us to respond to the call that Kiai Haji Yahya Stakuf has issued to all of us around the world, a call to strengthen rather than allow to be weakened the post-World War II rules-based international order. So I'm extremely grateful to all of you for joining us here in Jakarta. The motto of our gathering is, "Let us unite to abolish the primordial cycle of hatred, tyranny, and violence that plagues humanity." Right as we speak, conflict in the Middle East is shattering the lives of countless Palestinians and Israelis alike. But also, as Gus Yahya said in his remarks just a moment ago, this conflict is polarizing and destabilizing societies worldwide, including right here in Indonesia. And the fact that this conflict is so profound, that it is so polarizing, means that religious authorities face a stark choice. Will we act to ensure that our religious traditions serve as a genuine and dynamic source of solutions rather than problems in the 21st century, or will we acquiesce in the demise of the post-World War II rules-based international order by remaining silent or even cooperating with those who weaponize identity in order to foster tribalism, monopolize power, and destroy others? In the current geopolitical context today, religious authorities, that means those of us gathered in this room, those of us on the stage, religious authorities elsewhere around the world, religious authorities bear a special and unique responsibility and duty. For group identities, including religious, ethnic, and ideological, underlie and animate virtually every major political conflict in the world today. In this context, religious authorities, you religious authorities gathered here, have a special duty and a grave responsibility. From ancient times until the modern era, religion in particular has played a decisive role in shaping the moral framework and cultural norms of societies everywhere on earth. In addition, religious believers constitute 80% of the world's population and therefore constitute the single largest demographic within the human family. Religious and ideological conflicts nonetheless represent a particularly virulent threat to international peace and security. For as we see all around us, and as we're seeing in Indonesia as well, religious and ideological conflicts don't remain localized. They tend to metastasize and spread globally due to the ready appeal of sectarianism to those of like identity dwelling elsewhere. The spread of identity-based conflicts everywhere is creating nothing less than an existential threat to global peace and security. We are seeing growing and deepening conflicts between cultures, between nations, between ethnicities, between religions, between languages, and even between civilizations. As Samuel Huntington wrote exactly 30 years ago this year in his article in Foreign Affairs, instead of conflicts over political ideology dominating the world, conflicts between capitalism, socialism, and communism, or between democracy and fascism, we are seeing a growing and spreading clash of civilizations and a clash of civilizational identity, which divides nations from other nations, but also creates divisions and conflicts within nations. Such religious and cultural and civilizational conflicts feed upon and perpetuate the primordial cycle of hatred, tyranny, and violence that has plagued humanity since before the dawn of history. These conflicts beget immense suffering and an endless procession of victims and grievances whose claims to justice can never be fully satisfied. Ironically, these collective demands for justice, asserted in the name of a de facto tribal identity group, are often weaponized to victimize other groups in turn. This age-old pattern of group conflict and violence culminated in the horrors of the Second World War, killing something like 85 million people worldwide, and the subsequent emergence of a nascent global consensus with the establishment of the United Nations organization and its adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The Charter of the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were intended and were designed to abolish this primordial cycle of violence by establishing a rules-based international order that would protect national sovereignty and ensure respect for the equal rights and dignity of all. The UN organization, the UN Charter, and the UDHR, of course, are not perfect. The structure and functioning of the United Nations is problematic. However, by accepting the UN Charter, the nations of the world have endorsed, pardon me, at least in principle, the vision of a secure and peaceful world free of military aggrandizement, unjust discrimination, and oppression. As we approach the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights this coming December 10th, we again face a stark choice. Will our religious communities work to save the idea and the architecture of a rules-based international order? Or will we allow our religions to continue to be instrumentalized and weaponized by powerful political interests, by toxic nationalism, by racism, by tribalism, by interests that have no desire to perpetuate a rules-based international order, but instead would prefer to see the world revert to the law of the jungle? It is not an accident, let me just say before we begin our panel, that in having this discussion and in confronting this global crisis, it is not an accident that we are gathering here in Indonesia. The fact that we are here, first of all, reflects the visionary leadership of Kiai Haji Yahya Stakuf. In his leadership, he has also been encouraged and supported, we're proud and very happy to say, by the government of Indonesia, which was represented, of course, this morning by His Excellency Joko Widodo, President of the Republic of Indonesia. And the fact that these great leaders are seeking to strengthen the rules-based international order, in fact, reflects the foundational mission and vocation of the great country Indonesia where we stand today. The very Constitution of Indonesia, its original Constitution of 1945, in the very preamble, calls for the creation of, quote, a government of the nation of Indonesia, which shall protect all the people of Indonesia, so that all the blood that has been spilled to attain independence shall not be in vain, and to improve public welfare, educate the people, and, note this, participate in establishing a world order founded upon the principles of freedom, perpetual peace, and social justice." Unquote. In other words, the Constitution of Indonesia, the very DNA of Indonesia, is designed not just to serve the self-interest of Indonesia. It is rather to promote a world order that advances the freedom, peace, and justice of the human family. So, on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Kiai Haji Yahya Khalil Stakuf and the people of Indonesia for setting an example for the entire world. And so we enthusiastically and humbly join in the effort that is being led by our Indonesian friends. Without further ado, it's my privilege to welcome and introduce our panelists who will contribute to the goals I just described, the goals of strengthening and mobilizing the resources of religion to strengthen and restore a rules-based international order in the 21st century and to stop the cycle of violence, hatred, and conflict that we're seeing accelerating in so many parts of the world. Our first speaker to contribute to our discussion will be Dr. Kyle Wisdom, a PhD, who is an alumnus of Middlesex University and the Oxford Center for Mission Studies. He is here to represent the 600 million member World Evangelical Alliance, the largest Protestant assembly and gathering and organization in the world. Dr. Kyle Wisdom is no stranger to Indonesia. His research has focused on the interplay between religion and state, with an emphasis on Indonesia, where Kyle lived for more than a decade. And so welcome back to Indonesia, Dr. Wisdom. I should say that Dr. Wisdom is here representing our friend Dr. Thomas K. Johnson, who is a human rights theorist, moral philosopher, and evangelical theologian who could not be here for health reasons. And so Dr. Kyle Wisdom will read the remarks that the Honorable Reverend Dr. Thomas K. Johnson composed for the occasion. So it's our pleasure to welcome you, Dr. Wisdom.
From 1945 to 1950, our ancestors attempted a reboot of society. Countries took their independence from distant, abusive sovereigns. New constitutions were written. The UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were proclaimed. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Health Organization set to work. Religious scholars and members reassessed the relation between faith and national identities. This reboot became part of the rules-based international order. It was a massive attempt to avoid repeating the 35 years during which my grandparents observed 2 world wars, countless war crimes, genocide and ethnic cleansing, atrocities, starvation, a depression, and a Holocaust. The rules-based order was partly successful. World War III stayed cold, and billions of people had the opportunity to live. After 1989, I thought rules and rights might prevail. With my family, I moved to the other side of the Iron Curtain to see a free society unfold. I was not entirely disappointed. The rules-based order, a decade ago, Pope Francis began to describe a piecemeal Third World War. This first seemed a conflict of civilizations, but now it appears to be a rejection of post-war renewal. We see conflicts without number, and our mechanisms to solve conflict are shaking. We put treaties, constitutions, charters, and declarations on paper with great fanfare. Then society went paperless, a symbol of shredding a heritage. For answers, I turned to the judges administering war crimes trials after the war. I found this, quote, "The trials of these Japanese and Germans all took place under a philosophical cloud. None of the defendants had broken the laws of their countries, since all of their actions had been allowed by the legal systems of their own nations. Since they were not American citizens, they were not subject to American law. Respected legal scholars pointed out that international law did not hold individuals criminally accountable for conducting wars." End quote. Some of the judges responded by saying that murder is murder, even if something is wrong in the legal system. They conducted trials on that basis. Others probed deeper. Justice Henry Bernard of the International Tribunal for the Far East wrote, quote, "There is no doubt in my mind that such a war of aggression is and always has been a crime in the eyes of reason and universal conscience. Expressions of natural law upon which an international tribunal can and must base itself to judge the conduct of the accused. The natural law is shared by all, individuals and nations. Although opinions differ as to its nature, its existence is not seriously contested or contestable." End quote. We who follow Bernard may prefer the terminology of law of humanity. The term natural law sounds like the law of the jungle. Nevertheless, he identified the issue behind the reboot of society in which he participated. The leaders of that renewal assumed that there is a known global standard for human behavior. This provides the basis for war crimes tribunals, declarations of human rights, and a UN charter. In our forgetful times, we need to remind people of the great society-forming documents of our grandparents. But to recover peaceful international relations, we need many people to read the principles written on our hearts and our minds, to open our eyes to reason and universal conscience. A rules-based order must be based on the law of humanity, or it will fail. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the UN Charter say little about this moral law, probably to avoid religious language. In our meeting of religious authorities, we do not need to avoid such language. In the language of my Christian faith, I say there is a God-given knowledge of principles to right and wrong. It is very hard for people not to know this. I ask you to join me in opening our eyes to reason and universal conscience so that we can reconfirm the rules-based order bequeathed to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Wisdom, for reading the remarks of our dear friend, Reverend Dr. Thomas K. Johnson. Thank you for articulating so powerfully why a rules-based international order was and is necessary in order to abolish the primordial cycle of hatred, tyranny, and violence, and why that rules-based international order, in fact, is undergirded by a moral and spiritual vision. I'm delighted that our next speaker is going to continue the same theme and will describe the moral and spiritual vision that helped to create the post-war international order. Our dear friend, the Honorable César Rosselló, who comes to us from Spain and who also represents the European Union, is Secretary for Institutional Relations and Special Representative for Asia, the Pacific region, and the Middle East for Centrist Democrat International. He is responsible for dealing with relations between the Centrist Democrat International, which is the world's largest network of political parties, and other international organizations worldwide. He coordinates the implementation of the agenda of the President and Secretary General of the Centrist Democrat International for the regions for which he's responsible. Mr. Rosselló is also the political advisor to the European People's Party Secretary General. And I'm delighted that César Rosselló will speak to us in particular about the role of Christian democracy in creating the post-war international order, and we'll talk about the moral and spiritual vision that was indispensable to creating that order. Thank you very much, Mr. Rosselló.
Thank you. Yes? Yes. Thank you so much. World War II is often considered the most devastating and destructive global conflict in history. Involving nations worldwide, the scale and reach of the war caused an impact on international relations and led to the establishment of new geopolitical realities, such as the emergence of the United States and the Soviet Union as superpowers, the beginning of the Cold War, and the formation of the United Nations to promote peace, security, and international cooperation, preventing future conflicts and facilitating diplomatic solutions to global issues. Taking a quick look around us, we can easily conclude that efforts in that line were not enough. With armed conflicts still alive in many countries, it is the most recent between Israel and Hamas, the one that has definitely proven us right, when we denounced last year, with occasion of the R20 held in Bali, that a primordial cycle of hatred, tyranny, and violence has plagued humanity since before the dawn of history and continues to pose a serious threat to our societies. The Charter of United Nations in 1945 and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948 were designed to abolish this cycle by establishing a rules-based international order. The question now is whether this order is at stake, and if yes, what we can do to defend it. Revising history is always helpful, so if you allow me, I'd like to share with you what the role of Christian democracy was after World War II and why we, as Centrist Democrat International, are so proud of it. The aftermath of the war accelerated the process of decolonization, leading to a significant geopolitical realignment. It also marked the beginning of the nuclear age. In response to that threat, Western countries formed military alliances such as NATO, while Eastern countries would align under the Warsaw Pact. These alliances contributed to the polarization of the world into the Western Bloc and the Eastern Bloc. It is in this context where Christian democracy played a significant role, particularly in Western Europe, which was facing the daunting task of rebuilding itself. Christian democratic parties emerged as key players in this reconstruction process. So please let me share with you some examples of the Christian democracies' contribution to the post-war international order. The reconstruction process and the economic development where Christian democratic parties like the CDU in Germany and the Democrazia Cristiana in Italy play pivotal roles advocating for policies that emphasize social market economies, combining free market capitalism with social safety nets to address social inequalities and promoting economic stability. Talking about the European integration, notable Christian democratic leaders like Konrad Adenauer in Germany, Robert Schuman and Jean Monnet in France, and Alcide de Gasperi in Italy were key architects of the European coal and steel community, and also the European economic community. These leaders, among others, share a common vision of a united and integrated Europe, and their efforts lay the foundation for the current European Union. The collaboration between Christian democratic leaders from different European countries was essential in overcoming historical animosities and building a framework for economic and political cooperation. The democratic values and human rights, also important, were Christian Democrats like Jacques Maritain strongly advocated for them. Maritain, not a political leader but an influential Catholic philosopher and political thinker, had a significant impact on the intellectual and philosophical underpinnings of Christian democracy and its support for the European integration. He, as did others, advocated for democracy, human rights, and the integration of Christian principles into political life, focusing on the importance of a democratic political system as a means to ensure stability and prevent the rise of totalitarian regimes. Maritain's political philosophy emphasized also the importance of human dignity, natural law, and social justice. In reference to the Cold War politics, Christian Democrats played a crucial role in resisting the spread of communism. A clear example was Karol Wojtyla, a Polish philosopher who contributed to the development of Christian philosophy. Already as Pope John Paul II, he played a crucial role in the opposition to communism in Eastern Europe and was an influential moral voice in global affairs. Finally, Christian democratic parties advocated for social welfare policies that aim to address the needs of the population, particularly in the areas of healthcare, education, and housing, as part of a broader strategy to build social cohesion and prevent the rise of extremism. There were many other Christian philosophers and thinkers who contributed to the intellectual and moral fabric of Western societies after World War II, like Gilbert Keith Chesterton, Hans Urs von Balthasar, Dietrich von Hildebrand, Paul Ricoeur, Edith Stein, and Henri de Lubac, whose works continue to be studied today due to the importance of their contribution to a fairer world. In summary, Christian democracy played a multifaceted role in shaping the post-war international order while contributing significantly to the reconstruction and stabilization of Western Europe. The same applies to the role it played in the establishment of the United Nations and the drafting of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, providing important intellectual contributions and a commitment to human dignity, emphasizing the moral responsibility of nations and the importance of transcendent values in shaping international relations. For its relevance, the principles and values associated with Christian democracy found expression in the foundational documents of the United Nations and the UDHR. Ladies and gentlemen, up until here, the historical part of my intervention. To finish with a more contemporary note, I'd like to highlight that Christian democracy has evolved towards a larger movement represented today by the world's largest political organization, the Centrist Democracy International. This evolution, which involves a complex interplay of political, social, and ideological factors, reflects broader changes in society, shifts in political landscapes, and adaptations to modern challenges. Probably the most significant aspect of this evolution is the active embracing of religious pluralism, preventing the weaponization of identity and ensuring that religion functions as a genuine and dynamic source of solutions rather than problems. And this is exactly what has brought the Centrist Democracy International to Indonesia. the possibility to cooperate with new global partners with whom we share principles and values, regardless of their religious ascription, to foster the emergence of a truly just and harmonious world order founded upon shared civilizational values. And before finishing, I want to thank to all of you for your attention, but a big thank you for our friends of the R20, the Center for Shared Civilizational Values, and the world's largest Muslim organization, Nahdlatul Ulama, for the courage to organize this important international summit of religious authorities. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, César Rosselló. I think it's crucial to really emphasize that our last two speakers have emphasized that the post-war international order embodied by the United Nations Charter, and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights represented a revolution in world history. The powers that gathered after World War II did not just want to recreate a balance of power among great powers. This was not a group of countries and a gathering like the Congress of Vienna that ended the Napoleonic Wars, or like the Congress of Berlin, previous gatherings of great powers. Rather, the countries that organized the United Nations, that sought and accepted the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, wanted a world order that was based on a moral and spiritual vision, not just a sense of creating stability that would benefit great powers, but wanted to recreate a rules-based, morally informed world order that would safeguard the dignity, the independence, the freedom of all human beings everywhere. And it's really wonderful that Dr. Wisdom and the Honorable César Rosselló underscored the moral and spiritual vision that animated the post-war order. And it simply underscores that it's essential that if this order is going to continue, that moral and spiritual leaders need to gather and reinvest in the moral and spiritual foundations that make this vision possible and made it possible when it was first established. We also, though, need to recognize that this post-war order took a very long time in order to gather strength, and it's important to remember that many of the countries that were involved in creating the post-war order themselves did not abide by or uphold the principles of that order, including the United States of America. When the United States of America supported the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it was practicing segregation and racial discrimination in ways that were directly contrary to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I'm delighted that to speak about this reality, we have our dear friend, Imam Dr. Talib Shareef, who has come to us all the way from the United States of America, from Washington, D.C., where he is president of Masjid Muhammad, which is known as the nation's mosque in Washington, D.C. Dr. Shareef is among America's leading Muslim leaders. He is a leader of interfaith cooperation in the nation's capital. He has numerous accomplishments. He served for more than 30 years in the United States Air Force and left the military having achieved some of the highest honors it's possible to achieve in the American military. A few months back, Imam Dr. Talib Shareef was also given a special presidential award by President Joseph Biden. So it's a tremendous honor to have Imam Dr. Talib Shareef, who will speak to us about the role of a moral and spiritual vision in bringing America more into alignment with the principles of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And it's wonderful that Imam Talib will be speaking to us, not least because his own community has seen great inspiration in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and there's a wonderful history that could be told there. But I'm delighted that Imam Talib will speak about the role of the civil rights movement in dismantling Jim Crow, dismantling the system of racial segregation in America, and in bringing America into alignment with the post-war international consensus founded upon respect for the equal rights and dignity of every human being. Welcome, Imam Talib.
Thank you. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I'm humbled and grateful for the invitation to be here for this important summit, and I extend my best regards to the leaders and organizers. I join you in this distinguished gathering as a representative and a student of the late Imam W.D. Muhammad, and as a believer in the creator of heaven and earth, the same for all of us, who created us all and cares about us all equally. We are all one creation, united by Almighty God. Despite artificial divisions of race, color, and national origin, we are united by the most powerful bond of all, our common human origin. Allow me to briefly address our topic, again, which is the role of the civil rights movement in dismantling Jim Crow and in bringing America into alignment with the post-war international consensus founded upon respect for the equal rights and dignity of every human being. America, although it took on a new freedom, its life began with the mind and the same desire as its forefathers from Europe. They went into the lands of the dark races and brought back human beings for use as beasts of burden. These ugly things in the history of America are the things that eventually produce the faith and struggle of a people to see their humanity free, to have an independent expression, to be what Almighty God created it to be. Although chattel slavery had ended and physical freedom came, true human freedom did not yet exist due to legalized racial segregation or Jim Crow laws. These laws existed for about 100 years, ending in 1960s. Blacks didn't have the human dignity of other people and were not recognized as equal citizens of the nation. In fact, they were called second-class citizens and were denied the right to vote, hold jobs, have education, etc., and any who resisted often faced violence and death. The pressure from these circumstances ushered in the sacred human and civil rights movement that brought attention to the fact that America's actions didn't agree with its constitutional position that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with inalienable rights to life, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. Despite its beautifully worded Constitution, America was still treating human beings as though they were no more than animals. The civil rights movement, it was an irritator or a thorn in the side to help America face the fact that it had not yet realized the universal values it claimed to stand for as a nation. Among the leaders and personalities of the civil rights movement was a source of moral aggravation for America, but at the same time, a source of moral nourishment for the American people. And when I say civil rights movement, that includes acknowledging and appreciating the contributions of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and those connected to him, like Rosa Parks, Medgar Evers, John Lewis, etc., as well as those of the original Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad and those connected to him, like Malcolm X, Muhammad Ali, Imam W.D. Muhammad, etc. It was this powerful combination that created a moral force telling America, on one hand, fulfill your promise, and on the other hand, you can't fulfill it. You don't have the moral nature to do it. Dr. King was inviting America to fulfill its promise, and Elijah Muhammad was saying, you can't do it. These two sides of the same coin became a powerful force that united the cause of these two major groups that were responsible for the civil rights movement. As a result of this pressure, America made progress. It purged its blood and agreed to become a more human reality with one face, not two faces, for all the citizens of this country. Let us understand that the original Nation of Islam, led by Elijah Muhammad, along with the powerful Malcolm X, was a great factor in bringing that about, though it's often not identified in the civil rights movement. In the civil rights movement, there was a need to call out and bring out the evil of racism so that the citizens who were victims and citizens who were perpetuating it would have an opportunity to be healed, become healthy, and normal as God wants us to be as citizens, sharing in the blessings of the nation. With the post-war period, the movement manifested in America's global view another matter of importance, and that is, any time a people's rightful or legitimate grievances are ignored or condemned without addressing or resolving the shocking actions that have disturbed their souls, conscience, and peace, it is to disrespect their humanity and dismiss them as not truly equal members of society. Consequently, the build-up from repeated mistreatment of being ignored will cause the human spirit within to register the injustice and scream out, "That's enough." In conclusion, the role of the civil rights movement in dismantling Jim Crow and in helping America to welcome the post-war international consensus focused on human rights was to crystallize the emerging awareness that racial discrimination and legal segregation were unjust, ungodly, and incompatible with universal values. Thus, it was America's moral wake-up call to live up to the ideas of the American creed. Additionally, the movement contributed to the attention shifting from the trouble nations have with citizens to the trouble that's in all citizens of the world, and how the trouble in all citizens of the world affects life in our respective countries. In the words of Dr. King, who was also a human leader working to bring healthy human conditions to the souls of all citizens so that there would be a better human world for citizens to live in, he said, "An injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Thank you.
Thank you, Imam Talib, for that powerful reminder that the ideas of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights were not just words on paper, but they inspired oppressed people, including members of your community, who, by the way, established their first mosque in Washington on December 10th. What was the year, Imam Talib? 1960. On December 10th, 1960. And choosing that date was not an accident. They chose to establish their community on December 10th because that was the anniversary of the acceptance of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Thank you very much, Imam Talib. I'm delighted that our next speaker is Dr. Jacqueline C. Rivers, who is a scholar, a sociologist, a civil rights leader, a defender of religious freedom, who comes to us all the way from Boston, originally from Jamaica, did her undergraduate work and then later her PhD in sociology at Harvard University. She is executive director of the Seymour Institute for Black Church and Policy Studies, and I'm honored to say that I'm on the board of the Seymour Institute, and I'm an enthusiastic supporter of Dr. Rivers and her work. And I should say her husband, the Reverend Eugene Rivers, is with us as well, and he'll be speaking to us this evening at our gala dinner. Dr. Jacqueline Rivers is, as I said, a scholar, a sociologist, a defender of the poor, the rights of the poor, and of important principles such as the sanctity of life and religious freedom in America. She has spoken all over the world. She spoke in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, at a conference with Pope Francis on the family, and has spoken all over the world on issues related to justice and the poor and religious freedom. Dr. Rivers will speak to us now about how there is an urgent need for a new interfaith Bandung movement of Global South nations to serve as the world's conscience and to bring about a more multilateral and equitable rules-based international order founded upon respect for the equal rights and dignity of every human being. Dr. Rivers has found inspiration in the Bandung movement, which of course was inaugurated here in Indonesia in 1955, and we'll speak about that. So Dr. Rivers, welcome.
Thank you very much. As a Jamaican and a daughter of the Global South, I'm honored to speak at the R20 International Summit of Religious Authorities. I wish to express my gratitude to Pakia Holil Stakuf, Tim Shah, and Holland Taylor, and the host organizations Nahdlatul Ulama and the Center for Shared Civilizational Values for arranging this conference. The theme of my remarks is there's an urgent need for an interfaith Bandung movement of global South nations to serve as the world's conscience and to bring about a more multilateral and equitable rules-based international order founded upon respect for the equal rights and dignity of every human being. Some here may know that I am firmly committed to the teaching that Jesus Christ is the way, the truth, and the life, and that no one comes to God but by the same Jesus. Yet that very commitment to Christ is the basis for my conviction that all humans, and especially those who are people of faith, and even more those who are Christians, are called to live together in peace. To the extent that the nations of the Global South embrace this commitment to living in peace, founded on their commitment to religions of many different stripes, we can work together to enhance the post-war international order in an interfaith Bandung movement. As people of faith, we're called to be peacemakers and to reject violence. This witness is especially important in an increasingly hostile secular culture, which not only rejects the reality of the divine, but looks with derision and some opposition on those who believe. It is a culture that undermines the sanctity of both life and marriage. However, in the United States, where I now live, people of faith are standing together to serve the poor, to promote faith, and to resist the degradation of moral standards. A similar collaboration and partnership must be established among the nations of the Global South in an interfaith Bandung movement bringing together diverse nations that represent vast numbers of people around the globe, people who can be motivated by faith and commitment to religion in a way in which they may not be touched by politics. Much as the Bandung Conference of 1955 brought the Global South together, we must have a new Bandung movement that stands together against secularism of the West and advocates for our right to believe and to practice our beliefs, not just in private but in the public square as well. But that is not enough. We must oppose all forms of religious violence and coercion. We must work to end age-old religious conflicts that cost its victims so dearly and that feed the skepticism of the secularists. One particularly atrocious conflict with religious roots is horrifying people around the world at this very moment, the Israeli-Hamas conflict. On October 7, as everyone knows, Hamas launched a terrorist attack, an unforgivable terrorist attack that murdered over 1,200 people indiscriminately, men and women, grandmothers, children, even babies. That was followed by the kidnapping of over 200 others. Perhaps even worse is the fact that Hamas appears to use a strategy of using their own people as human shields, of even operating in hospitals. As lovers of peace, truth, and justice, we must deplore such heinous actions. Yet we cannot turn a blind eye to the actions of the nation of Israel or to the long-term subjugation of Palestinians by Israel. And now, with unrelenting airstrikes and the invasion of ground troops, more than 10 times as many Palestinians are dead as Israelis were murdered on October 7, over 12,000 people. And those who are surviving are doing so with a severe shortage of food, water, and fuel, living in terror because Israel has seriously limited the entry of humanitarian aid to the area, causing a truly tragic humanitarian crisis. Praise be to God, a recent deal has begun an exchange of hostages, providing a pause in the fighting which should also release more aid for Gazans. We must decry this violence, which has deep religious roots. There must be freedom and justice and peace for all. That must be the goal of a new interfaith Bandung movement.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Jacqueline Rivers, for so powerfully and eloquently affirming the call that Gus Yahya has issued to all of us to establish a new interfaith movement for shared civilizational values, and indeed a new interfaith Bandung movement, so powerfully described by you, Dr. Rivers. Thank you very, very much. I'm now delighted to welcome a new friend from Nigeria, the Right Reverend Professor Dapo Asaju, who is Bishop Theologian of the Church of Nigeria in the Anglican Communion. I'm delighted that he comes to us representing a gentleman who is a great friend of our work, and that is the primate of the Church of Nigeria, Archbishop, the Most Reverend Henry Ndikuba. Right Reverend Professor Dapo Asaju has served the Anglican Communion and served the Church of Nigeria in many capacities. He has led seminaries. He has conducted research and scholarship on a range of issues, including the ongoing terrible religious violence occurring, especially in northern Nigeria and in his country. And he's here to show solidarity with us and support for the work that we are doing here. And again, he comes to us representing the leader of the Church of Nigeria, which is the largest community in the Anglican Communion, with some 25 million Anglicans, a major and again the largest part of the Anglican Communion. Bishop Asaju will speak to us about the urgent need to abolish the primordial cycle of identity-based hatred, tyranny, and violence in Africa in particular. So welcome to you. Your first visit to Indonesia, we understand. A warm welcome to you, Bishop Asaju.
Good morning to our dear religious leaders, organizers, and participants. I bring warm greetings from the Anglican Church of Nigeria, and especially from His Grace, the Most Reverend Henry Ndikuba, the Archbishop and Primate of the Church of Nigeria. His Grace participated in the R20 summit last year in Bali, Indonesia, and is extremely grateful for his continuing friendship and partnership with Kiai Haji Yahya Cholil Stakov, with Nahdlatul Ulama, and with the Center for Shared Civilizational Values. The theme of my remark is the urgent need to abolish the primordial cycle of identity-based hatred, tyranny, and violence in Africa. Many conflicts and crises happening in parts of the world result from deep-rooted primordial sentiments which breed hostilities, violence, discriminations, and oppressions among people in many communities of the world. People are labeled with negative identities, and they are badly treated based on historical occurrences involving their tribes, their religion, or their families. The search for world peace, which the R20 is pursuing, must address the primordial cycle of identity-based hatred among people. African people, commonly described as Negroes, have suffered from primordial discriminations bordering on racism and the effects of colonialism. These have affected their culture, languages, and historic identities. In the effort to subjugate the Negroes, the Hamitic theory, which is misinterpreting biblical connection of the African people to the curse put upon Ham and Canaan in the Bible, has been badly used. Theology has been weaponized as a religious tool to oppress the Negro people all over. It has been weaponized to present and treat the black Africans as a cursed race who must be divinely subjugated to Caucasian, Asian, and Arab rule. The transatlantic slave trade, which claimed the lives of millions of Africans, dehumanized the identity of African people, and have continued to affect their self-esteem in different places in the diaspora, including apartheid South Africa and United States of America. Many African refugees have perished in the Mediterranean Sea in their desperation to emigrate through illegal routes to the Western world. In the process, many are often enslaved, sexually molested, and trafficked for prostitution in Arabian, Asian, and European countries. It still appears that in many parts of the world, black lives do not matter. The Nazi ideology of anti-Semitism and Aryan superiority, we will remember, resulted in the Holocaust against the Jews, which claimed about 6 million lives. The Rwandan genocide between the Tutsis and the Hutus, which claimed about 800,000 lives, and the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian wars, warn humanity of the dangers of weaponizing identity based on primordial hatred towards others. These are long-standing people who have relationships and deep-rooted hatred. Sometimes we may need at this forum to call the theologians of all religions together and let them explore the need to come together to reinterpret the weaponization of Holy Scriptures as a basis for attacking people. The Israel-Palestinian crisis has been on for a long time. It dates back to the Israeli-Philistine crisis many years ago, when they used Scripture as a basis to legitimize attacking others because of their identity. This has led to calamities in the past. Ethnicity and religious extremism have been employed to foment internal crises in West Africa. Primordial competition and historical domination of one group over the others result in discrimination, social disequilibrium, and political instability. Nigeria has a population of about 230 million people who speak about 250 languages, spoken by majority tribes of Hausa Fulani in the north, Igbos in the east, and Yorubas in the west, as well as various ethnic minorities. Each group have their peculiar cultural practices and historical relationships, which continue to form the basis of their respective claims of superiority over other communities. The 19th century jihadist crusades of Uthman Dan Fodio, a Fulani by tribe, resulted in the dominance of the Fulani tribe over various indigenous ethnic communities in northern parts of Nigeria, including Hausas, Nupes, and others. This rule has been sustained, which has been described as the deadliest terrorist group in the world, derives its names from the belief that Western education and civilization is evil and should be jettisoned in preference for Islamic education and lifestyle. They, like the Taliban in Afghanistan, oppose girl education and have abducted hundreds of girls from Christian schools and communities. The Boko Haram and similar terrorist organizations like ISWAP, ISIS in West Africa, operating within Nigeria and neighboring countries like Cameroon, Chad, Niger, have killed too many people based on their ill-conceived primordial religious beliefs. It is reported that more than 350,000 people, predominantly Christians, have been killed by religious terrorist groups in parts of Nigeria to date. There are almost 2.4 million internally displaced persons in the northeastern states. More than 70 clergymen have been killed, over 13,000 churches and 1,500 Christian schools were destroyed or burnt. In one of our states, in Plateau, headsmen of the Fulani have seized forcefully 102 communities and renamed them, and they are now under the occupation of the Fulani militias. More than 22,000 persons, most of them children, remain missing as a result of Boko Haram attacks. Rather than the West to join in helping to find solutions to this, they see it as a result of climate change and the environmental crisis. Instead of feeling for those who are victims of this crisis, they turn the other eye. And this is a big problem for humanity. We should identify with the feelings of others. In the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, both sides are wrong, and we need to intervene. And I hope that R20 can also seek for a forum at the United Nations. They cannot take decisions about the destiny of humanity based on politics alone. Religious organizations matter. R20 should seek an audience to address United Nations, and let's bring together all the leaders of religion and let's form a solution which we put on the table. This trend of using religion to cause crisis is common in Mali, Niger, Guinea, and many parts of Africa. Unfortunately, we are witnessing the resurgence of military coups in Africa. Several countries in Africa are losing confidence in democracy, and the military are taking over. It is a very bad trend. Primordial religious and cultural beliefs have also negatively affected the fundamental human rights of many people in Nigerian communities. We also have our own primordial biases which are causing problems. It is not just international conflicts, but internal conflicts. A caste system, the kind we find also in India, the Dalit controversy, there is also caste system within Nigeria where certain groups of people are regarded as second-class citizens and they are discriminated against. There are also discriminations against widows based on cultural beliefs. So primordial sentiments, whether religious or cultural, need to be challenged. We must see ourselves as one humanity. All religions preach peace. All of them speak harmony. We must go back to the original intention of religion, regarding religion as an individual affair, allowing people the right to their own faith. The example of Indonesia is a big challenge we are taking home. It has been like that in Nigeria in the past. People have been working together. There has been religious balancing in government, and people have been seeing each other as one community. Extremism of any kind, whether ethnicity or religion, will destroy society. The weaponization of identity in various forms have become inimical to peace, stability, and progress of human societies. Concerted efforts must be made by leaders of faith and thought to reject primordial basis for hatred, for violence, and for domination of others in contemporary society. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Your Grace. Thank you very much, Your Grace, Bishop Asaju. We're extremely grateful that you are here to remind us that among the most horrific conflicts in the world today is going on right now in northern Nigeria. In the list of conflicts that people have in their heads, we think of Ukraine, we think of what's going on in the Middle East, but almost no one remembers what's happening in Nigeria. But we remember, and we stand with you, and we're very grateful that you traveled all this way to talk about the crisis that your people in Nigeria continue to face. It was a priority for us to have His Grace Archbishop Henry attend the R20 last year. We're delighted to be working with him so that we can focus the world's attention on this forgotten conflict and this forgotten crisis, this forgotten crime against humanity that's going on in Nigeria. Thank you very much again. And now I'm delighted that we will have our friend Imam Yahya Pallavicini, who is coming to us from Italy, speak to us now. Imam Yahya Pallavicini is an eminent scholar, a thoughtful, deeply cultured public intellectual. He's become a dear friend to me and to all of us in Nahdlatul Ulama and the Center for Shared Civilizational Values. He and his distinguished family established and have led the Muslim community in Italy for many decades. He's also chairman of the European Council of Ulama. He has spoken in distinguished forums across the world on numerous topics. He was one of the distinguished religious authorities who participated in the R20 summit in Bali last year, having given a memorable and beautiful address on spiritual ecology last year in Bali. And we are delighted that he'll be speaking to us now about the challenges being faced by Europeans right now, identity conflicts that are rife in Europe, and he'll be speaking to us about the need to overcome religious-based hatred and violence around the world. Thank you very much, Imam Yahya Pallavicini.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Peace to you all, and if I may say, It's not the exact translation because, according to the Islamic traditional teaching, it's the peace of God that should inspire our hearts, our soul, our minds, and our actions. It's not an abstract, ordinary peace. It's something that is really trying to inspire all levels of humanity. And thanks to General Chairman Pak Yahya Takuf for again Nahdlatul Ulama allowing and inviting me as Quraysh, as a ulema, to share and to be inspired and to implement this inspiration from Southeast Asia and from Indonesia, even in the West and in Italy. And thanks to Holland Taylor and Tim for this kind invitation. In my brief presentation, I will try to express how Muslims in the West will focus on threatening and serious intellectual crisis among believers and citizens in Europe, and on the consequent risk for an authentic civilization of losing its life awareness. What strikes us in the many popular demonstrations that have been gathering thousands of citizens against the war in the Middle East for weeks is the slogan, repeated obsessively and angrily, Allahu Akbar, free Palestine. This slogan has become so viral that it seems to be a commandment that every Muslim, to be truly a Muslim or to be proving to be truly a Muslim, must commit to shout. We forget a detail that is far from irrelevant. Allahu Akbar is a religious and ritual invocation in which faithful Muslims testify to the sublime greatness of Allah, testify to the inspiration to serve the immense conception of the reality of Allah for His satisfaction and not for our ego. Faithful Muslims also testify to their own subordinate and pacified acceptance of the majesty of Allah and their quest to reach a degree of spiritual piety, taqwa, that protects the believers from pride, presumption, arrogance, megalomania, and delusion of omnipotence, which according to an Islamic doctrinal term could be called kibriya. Now the root of Akbar and kibriya is the same, supreme greatness. But when this formula is addressed to Allah, to Almighty God, it expresses His infinite greatness. Allahu Akbar. When on the other hand, it is the arrogant who adopt it, it becomes a boundless outburst of individual pride. Now we need to wonder how many Muslims who shout Allahu Akbar do not run the risk of expressing with pride and resentment the manipulation of the true meaning of the formulas they invoke. It would be indeed paradoxical if the most holy name of Allah were to be abused by some Muslim demonstrators in the squares of this lowly world to glorify an idol of earthly justice deprived of the truth of the Spirit and mercy. After all, we have already witnessed this dismay, this similar blasphemous use by Al-Qaeda terrorists when they slit the throats of many Muslims as well as Christian prisoners in Syria and Iraq, violating every possible religious rule of Islamic Sharia, of Islamic rule and law. Free Palestine. From what? From occupation, from the military, from the violence of war, from death and suffering, All very well. But we would also like to add that from an authentically religious perspective, liberation must above all be from something or someone towards something else and someone true. Liberation from evil, from ignorance, from the criminal and ideological manipulation of religion, liberation from corruption in politics that becomes militant and warlike tyranny instead of being a service to the people and to their outer and inner development. We need to free ourselves from external evil by starting with internal one, without speculating on blame or causes or number of victims or the level of atrocity or of others to conceal the relevant absence of concrete educational and social good offered to our people. Liberation from error, al-munqidh min al-dalal, is the title of a biographical work of Imam Abu Hamid al-Ghazali radiallahu anhu, who teaches us that this liberation is from darkness towards light, towards the light of Muhammadan enlightenment, a celestial and primordial light that allows us to see reality for what is truly is, and to recognize above all what is invisible and what transcends the ordinary plan of superficial appearance of forms. Faithful and virtuous Muslims aspire to this liberation and blessed enlightenment as heirs of Prophet Muhammad's companion. Achieving this spiritual liberation and enlightenment may also result in liberation from corruption and oppression. But this order must be respected, and priorities and proportions must not be subverted so as to achieve a contingent result that can never be the consequence of an agreement on the principle. Liberation towards good, a common good, no one good against the other or without the other. Finally, the liberation of Palestine. Which Palestine are we talking about? Are we talking about the political interpretation resulting from recent agreements with the State of Israel that have been mismanaged and poorly respected by the alternative political representations in recent decades? Or do we mean the land that has historically been experienced by Palestinians under Western control, being called British Protectorate? Or again, do we mean the same land but under the Ottoman Caliphate for 3 centuries from 1500? And should any of these assumptions always exclude the full dignity for Jewish citizens and believers to live and practice their religion, to freely visit the city of Abraham's tomb and Jerusalem? And why not addressing the same questions to other regions in conflict, including the invasion and war that has been going on for 2 years in Ukraine, separating and turning Orthodox Christians of the Moscow Patriarchate against their brethren in Kiev? Some experts on tradition reminds us that Kiev can be considered the third Rome. Other philosophers put forward their proposal for a new state of Jerusalem for all citizens of all Semitic cultures and monotheistic religions. Speculating on the symbolism of certain cities is the opposite of recognizing the function of spiritual centers. And the ideal of one's own eternity is the opposite of accepting one's own eschatology. Thinking big and making parallels pragmatically is the opposite of meditating and contemplating on God's infinite mercy and metaphysics. It is this megalomania in the individual that prevents them from acting charitably, causing only destruction and misery. Let us be careful not to confuse the liberation of a territory with the liberation of a brother and a sister, and not to confuse the enemy with the neighbor, so as not to admit that there are far greater errors to be corrected at home and for the good of every family, people, and the unity of civilization. In the name of what true God or true religion are invasions or wars legitimate, or massacres and kidnappings, retaliations or revenge organized? What faith can there possibly be in collecting armaments and exploiting technology to continue fighting for years without any success, not even territorial? What humanity and what mentality, or I would say intellectual insight, will we find in the Middle East and in Europe and in the rest of the world tomorrow? Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you profoundly, Imam Yahya, for that deeply spiritual perspective and moral vision and religious vision that you've articulated, one that firmly resists and condemns the political weaponization of religion and belief in Almighty God, and that instead insists on the priority of spiritual authority and spiritual values in our current discussions of the conflicts raging around the world. Thank you very, very much. Our next speaker comes to us from the United States, Dr. Walter Ratliff. He is coming to us from the U.S., where he is a lecturer at the University of Maryland. He is also a senior writer and journalist. He earned a Master of Arts in Islam and Muslim-Christian Relations and a Doctor of Liberal Studies in Religion and Social Movements from Georgetown University. I'm very happy and proud to say that he was a doctoral student of mine when he earned his doctorate at Georgetown. And I'm happy to say that he survived that experience, that unfortunate experience, as you can tell from the fact that he's sitting with us here. For his journalism and his scholarship, he has won numerous awards. I could list a number of awards. He most recently won an award in 2023, an Award of Merit from the Religion Communications Council for his work for the Associated Press on a Religion Roundup audio feature. Dr. Ratliff will speak to us about how equitable accountability among powerful nations, including permanent members of the UN Security Council, has a direct effect on the strength of the rules-based international order, and he will speak to us about other challenges to a rules-based international order. Welcome, Dr. Ratliff.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Thank you very much. Hello, everyone. It's an honor to speak to you today, and it's wonderful to be...
Walter, we need a new mic.
Thank you very much. Check, check. Here we go. Let's use this one. Well, hello, everyone. It's an honor to speak to you today, and it's really wonderful to be in beautiful Indonesia. When we look at the world today, we see that it's aflame in conflict. This is true from Europe to the Middle East to Asia. Often religious groups are caught in the middle of these conflicts, and religious symbols are evoked by those who wish to exert power over others. Yet the violent exertions of power and the forces of authoritarianism facing the world today were not unanticipated. After World War II, the world community, with a special role among the world's most powerful countries, formed the UN Security Council. They ratified the UN Charter and issued the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This system of a rules-based international order was intended to hold accountable global actors, both big and small, to a set of principles that would prevent future wars and conflicts. When we look at the hostilities of today, we must ask, to paraphrase C.S. Lewis, if the rules-based international order was tried and left wanting, or if it was found difficult and left untried. The new international order has in fact been remarkably enduring. It's been shaped and enforced by member nations and has effectively addressed situations that could have metastasized into further conflict. In many instances, the rules-based international order has been resilient and effective over the decades. But today, it has encountered a critical challenge. In the face of today's violent struggles, many are calling for the permanent members of the UN Security Council to abide by the rules that they helped write for the rest of the world. They see the structure of international cooperation endangered by powerful global actors who behave against the international rules that restrain the less powerful. The challenges to the system they see are not necessarily in the rules themselves, but in a double standard. The glaring reality they see running through today's most violent conflicts is that the efficacy of a rules-based order hinges to a great degree on the commitment of the most powerful global actors. They cite current examples where powerful actors have circumvented sanctions, engaged in territorial expansion, or violated human rights. These set a dangerous precedent. A selective approach to international rules erodes the credibility of the international system, creating a breeding ground of chaos and discord. Underlying the rules and normative principles are concepts of mutual respect and equitable treatment. These concepts are integral to the fabric of a cohesive global community. The UN Charter and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights encapsulate fundamental principles that form the bedrock of a just and equitable international system. In a world of interconnected economics, rapid technological change, and wide cultural diversity, the rules-based international order can be the cornerstone for addressing conflict. Binding rules of equitable accountability among nations and non-state actors are needed to build a peaceful global community on those foundations. Fostering a global order that encourages cooperation and accountability to internationally agreed upon rules strengthens the legitimacy of that order. When powerful nations flout these rules rather than seek principled reforms, it undermines that legitimacy and perpetuates a culture of impunity. Selective adherence to international rules hinders the realization of a just and harmonious global community. An effective rules-based order is not a mere aspiration. Rather, it is a shared responsibility that requires the commitment of every actor on the global stage. Accountability with respect to international rules, irrespective of a nation's size or relative power, is not a utopian ideal. Rather, it's a pragmatic necessity for fostering a just and peaceful future. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ratliff, for that very powerful and eloquent reminder that the permanent members of the UN Security Council should live by the rules they themselves helped write for the rest of the world, and that a truly rules-based international order is not compatible with pervasive double standards. I'm delighted now that our next speaker is Zainab Al-Suwaij, Director of the American Islamic Congress. Zainab Al-Suwaij is the co-founder and director of the American Islamic Congress. She has been a social activist, courageous and powerful social activist, first in Iraq and then later in the United States over many, many years. She was a courageous opponent of the regime of Saddam Hussein as a very young woman in her 20s, left Iraq where she faced great danger and threats to her life. After September 11th, she helped found the American Islamic Congress after September 11th, 2001 to foster tolerance, promote civil society and civil rights, and mobilize a moderate voice in the American Muslim community. She has been a longtime friend and colleague, and we're delighted to have her with us this afternoon to talk about the dangers of identity politics and tribalism, a view from Iraq. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First, I would like to thank the R20, Nahdlatul Ulama, and the Center for Shared Civilizational Values for such an important and timely meeting. We cannot be in more critical time than this that we're following right now. The whole world, it's in a chaos. I've been in the Middle East for the past few weeks, and I have seen how critical it is and how sensitive the situation is all over the region. Even though today I will be talking about the dangers of identity, politics, and tribalism as a view from Iraq, but we cannot deny what's going on in the whole region. As a person who survived several conflicts in Iraq, I know exactly the feeling of being terrorized based on a religious or ethnic identity. Identity, politics, and tribalism can have a deeply divisive effect, and Iraq has experienced the ramification firsthand. These forces often exacerbate social divisions, hindering unity and fostering conflict. In Iraq, the sectarian divides among various ethnic and religious groups have played a significant role in the country's political and social landscape, leading to power struggle, violence, and challenges in building a cohesive nation. The emphasis on group identities over shared values, common goals, and can create a fractured society, making it difficult to address broader issues and establish inclusive governance. Certainly, the complicities of identity, politics, and tribalism have historical roots deeply embedded in ethnic, religious, and sectarian divisions. The country's diverse population of Arabs, Kurds, Turkomans, Assyrians, Yazidis, and various of religious groups such as Christians, Shia Muslims, and Sunni Muslims, among others. These diverse identities have often been politicized and exploited by different factions seeking power and influence. The post-Saddam eras exacerbated these divisions as power struggle emerged among various groups vying for control. Politicians often leverage these identities to consolidate their base support, future deepening social rivals. These fragmentation impedes for the formation of unified national identity, leading to a fragmented political leadership where loyalty to the sect or tribal often overweighed allegiance to the nation. Moreover, the lack of trust and historical grievances among these groups has led to a cycle of violence and instability. Issues such as resources allocations, representation, and governance become entangled in this identity-based struggle, hindering progress and national development. Addressing these challenges necessitate fostering an inclusive politics promoting dialogue and building institutions that transcend sectarian or tribal divides. It requires a shift towards emphasizing common interests and values that can bridge these differences and unite the populations towards shared vision for the future. However, achieving such a unity amidst deeply rooted divisions remains a significant challenge. The question is, what the role of religious leaders in solving this issue? For example, Ayatollah Ali Sistani is one of the most influential religious leaders in Iraq, played a critical role in influencing Iraqi politicians and Iraqi politics and society, especially after the fall of Saddam Hussein's. His role extended beyond the religious guidance to political influence, particularly in fostering stability and unity. Sistani advocates for a unified Iraq and emphasized the importance of national election and the formation of democratic governments that represented all communities. He issued a religious edict urging Iraqis to participate in the political process, advocating for civil states and respect the rights of all citizens, regardless of their religious and ethnic background. During times of heightened sectarian tension, Sistani acted as a voice of moderation, urging unity and restraint among different religious groups. His intervention often aimed to diffuse conflict and prevent future sectarian violence. His authority and moral standing with the Shia community as well as other communities provided a unifying forces, encouraging cooperation among various factions. Additionally, Sistani calls for peaceful coexistence, and his insist on the role of law help counter extremist ideologies and contributed to the stability of the country in the certain period of turmoil. Also, his meeting with Pope Francis sent a significant message to all about the importance of unity among different faith groups. However, it's important to note that while Sistani's influence was significant, Iraqi challenges are multifactored, and his impact on the broader issues of governance, sectarianism, and identity politics has been both loaded and debated. The complexities of Iraq politics landscape goes beyond the influence of any single figure, no matter how important he is. Religious leaders in Iraq have attempted to bridge sectarian, political, and tribal divides by employing various strategies aimed to fostering peace and unity. Start with interfaith dialogue. Many religious groups and leaders has engaged in interfaith dialogue, beginning by gathering religious leaders from different religious communities to promote mutual understanding and tolerance. This effort aims to highlight common values, shared goals among diverse religious groups. Calls for unity. Leaders such as Ayatollah Sistani, as mentioned earlier, and many other religious leaders have emphasized of the importance of unity and needs for Iraqis to prioritize their national identity over sectarian or tribal affiliation. This message is often focused on shared citizenship and cooperation for the greater good of the nation. Mediation and conflict resolution also at that time was one of the most highlighted programs that have been acted as many groups acted as a mediator to facilitate dialogue between conflicted parties to resolve disputes peacefully. Advocating for inclusive governments. Some religious figures have advocated for inclusive government structured that represent all segments of society. They've promoted the idea of a fair and just system that addresses the needs of diverse communities, aiming to reduce violence and marginalization of a lot of different groups and to have an inclusive society. And finally, educational initiatives religious leaders have supported educational initiatives that promote tolerance, understanding, and respect for diversity among the younger generation. This includes initiatives within the religious institutions aimed to fostering more inclusive society. However, while these efforts have made strain, in certain instances, challenges persist due to the deeply enriched historical grievances, political power struggle, and external influence. Achieving lasting peace and unity required sustained effort across multiple fronts and the commitments of various stakeholders beyond religious and religious leaders alone. So the responsibility, it's among all of us as citizens, not only of the Iraqi nations, but overall of the world, is to help sustain peace, unity, and great civilizational values among people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Zainab Al-Suwaij. Thank you very, very much. We now welcome the Reverend Raymond De Souza, who comes to us from Canada. The Reverend De Souza is a Catholic priest. He is an economist. He is also a journalist. He is a regular columnist for the National Post in Canada. A few months back, shortly after our G20 Religion Forum R20 Summit in Bali, he wrote a column about the R20, and we recently welcomed him to Indonesia for the meeting of our ASEAN Intercultural and Interreligious Dialogue Conference, and it's wonderful to welcome the Reverend Raymond De Souza back to Indonesia, where he will speak to us today about the role of the Second Vatican Council in bringing a major global religious community, the Catholic Church, into alignment with a post-war international consensus founded upon respect for the equal rights and dignity of every human being. Father De Souza, welcome.
Good. Thank you, Dr. Shah. Thank you to our hosts today. The Second Vatican Council articulated an interreligious vision which recognizes the rights and dignity of those who follow non-Christian religious traditions. But before I look at the text of Vatican II, let us go back to the beginning, to the very beginning, to use your word primordial, which is the term you introduced this panel with. The first book of the Hebrew and Christian Bible, the book of Genesis, finds many echoes in the Quran. Many of the principal characters appear in both. At the beginning of both sacred texts, we find the story of Cain and Abel. Cain kills his brother Abel. Divine revelation thus teaches us an early truth about man in his fallen state. He is a rival to his brother, and this rivalry is lethal. This sibling rivalry is a dominant theme in Genesis. We see it again in Isaac and Ishmael, Esau and Jacob, Joseph and his brothers. It appears that sibling rivalry, enmity, hatred, murder, is written deep into the human drama. But we should note that there is also a progression in Genesis. Cain kills Abel, but Isaac and Ishmael are estranged. They come together for the funeral of their father Abraham. Jacob fears that Esau will seek vengeance upon him. Instead, the brothers meet and make a cold peace. In the story of Yusuf, we see that reconciliation is achieved. The sons of Jacob, Israel, overcome pride, jealousy, and betrayal, and are restored to genuine fraternity. We note that the proximate cause of the murder of Abel by Cain is a religious dispute. Cain kills Abel over an act of worship. Should we fear that religious rivalry, like sibling rivalry, is written too deep into the human story, the same sacred scriptures for Christians, Jews, Muslims trace out an arc from murder to restored fraternity. There are reasons for hope. The Second Vatican Council faced a challenge. The century since the Reformation had witnessed the great scandal of Catholic-Protestant violence, even if that had diminished by the late 19th century. The horrors of the Holocaust, perpetrated by an atheistic regime in the heart of Christian Europe, posed the question of relations with Jews with a new urgency. A new appreciation of human rights, expressed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, offered an opportunity to provide a theological grounding for the same. In its brief declaration on non-Christian religions, entitled Nostra Aetate, Our Age, Vatican II addressed the matter regarding the Jews forthrightly. The Church decries hatred, persecution, displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. We need those words again today. We decry displays of anti-Semitism directed against Jews at any time and by anyone. And we need those words in the Christian world and in the Islamic world. Regarding Islam, Nostra Aetate taught the Church regards with esteem also the Muslims. They adore the one God living and subsisting in himself. The conclusion is put in explicitly Christian terms. The Church reproves, as foreign to the mind of Christ, any discrimination against men or harassment of them because of their race, color, condition of life, or religion. For students of interreligious relations, those passages are well known and constitute a significant moment in the history of religion. Yet I think even more significant is what Vatican II taught in its dogmatic constitution on the Church entitled Lumen Gentium, Light of the Nations. The first document, Nostra Aetate, is about others, as it were. Lumen Gentium, the constitution on the Church, is how we Catholics understand ourselves. Thus, Vatican II taught that because we are Catholics who profess faith in Jesus Christ, therefore we must regard the Jewish people as remaining, quote, most dear to God, for God does not repent of the gifts he makes, nor of the calls he issues. Muslims are likewise regarded, quote, professing the faith of Abraham, who along with us adore the one and merciful God, who on the last day will judge mankind. Indeed, precisely because we profess the God of Abraham to be God and Father of all, the Catholic Church teaches, quote, God is not far distant from those who in shadows and images seek the unknown God, for it is he who gives to all men life and breath. And whatever good or truth is found amongst them is looked upon by the Church as a preparation for the gospel. Those who look to Vatican II for Catholic affirmation of religious fraternity as a basis for human rights and dignity are wise not to overlook this more foundational text, this key Catholic teaching, namely that the very nature of the Church is oriented toward respect for the religious identity of all who seek God with a sincere heart. Permit me to close with words from the Holy Father. You mentioned his meeting with Sistani in Iraq. This was just a few months before that meeting. He wrote the following: we believers are challenged to return to our sources in order to concentrate on what is essential, worship of God and love for our neighbor. lest some of our teachings taken out of context end up feeding forms of contempt, hatred, xenophobia, or negation of others. The truth is that violence has no basis in our fundamental religious convictions, but only in their distortion. Thank you.
Thank you, Father De Souza. Thank you very much for that eloquent discussion of the relevance of the teaching of the Second Vatican Council to our discussion of identity-based conflict and restoring the foundations of a rules-based international order. Thank you very much indeed. Well, to close our panel, it is no accident that we have invited a great friend and respected analyst of global affairs, Dr. James Dorsey, to offer his concluding thoughts. Dr. Dorsey will speak to us about the role of religion and religious identity in the Israel-Gaza conflict and the significance of Nahdlatul Ulama's call to action in response to the global weaponization of identity and the spread of identity-based conflict. It's no accident that we've asked Dr. Dorsey to speak to us. In the conclusion of this panel, Dr. Dorsey is one of the world's foremost analysts of the intersection of religion and culture and geopolitical dynamics. He is currently adjunct senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. He has done unparalleled, in-depth research over many years on what he calls the battle for the soul of Islam, and he has been a foremost analyst of the unique power and position of Nahdlatul Ulama in that struggle for the soul of Islam. We're deeply grateful to you, Dr. Dorsey, for joining us to conclude our discussion.
Thank you, Tim. I'm in the lucky position not only to be last, but I'm told my time is up. Ignore it. Thank you. The tragedy currently unfolding in Gaza is vividly illustrates the significance of what this gathering is seeking to achieve. It drives home the importance of what Nahdlatul Ulama seeks to achieve, what everybody in this room wants to achieve: an end to ethnic and religious conflict. The situation in Gaza is the product of dehumanization and demonization of the other, rooted in a self-righteous understanding of oneself, a sense of superiority that admits no fault. By dehumanizing the other, one dehumanizes oneself. Exhibit A is Hamas's brutal and deliberate targeting of innocent civilians on October 7, and its failure to shield Palestinians from Israel's indiscriminate and brutal response. While Hamas hides in shelters denied to Palestinian civilians, Israel demonstrates a willingness to sacrifice the lives of innocents. To be sure, context matters in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. But while context can help what has come to pass, it cannot justify it. The context includes long-standing Israeli policy, its 56-year-long occupation of Palestinian lands, 16-year-long siege of Gaza, and systematic thwarting of a just and equitable resolution to the conflict. It includes the failure of Palestinian leaders in Gaza and the West Bank who have proved incapable of rising to the challenges their responsibilities demand, and who continually play into the hands of Israeli hardliners. The context also includes a wider cultural environment in which demonization, dehumanization, self-righteousness, supremacy, brutality, abuse, humiliation, and the denial of human dignity are deeply rooted. Both Israeli and Palestinian culture have been shaped by outdated and obsolete concepts rooted in religious law that breed intolerance, hatred, and violence. What Nahdlatul Ulama has set out to achieve is aspirational, bold, and ideational. The notion of religious judicial reform challenges concepts of morality, ethics, and principles, not necessarily as one imagines them, but as they are applied. It conceptualizes double standards that many in this room decry. Nahdlatul Ulama project challenges autocrats who deprive religion of its key civic role and reduce it to a mere pillar of support for authoritarianism. The quest to challenge religious jurisprudence helps frame debates about the rule of law and the nature of a world order in the 21st century, even if changing fundamentally deeply rooted attitudes is likely to be a generational process. One can question aspects of Nahdlatul Ulama's strategy, as I have, but the fact is that Nahdlatul Ulama has gone where most advocacy groups, religious or otherwise, have not. It has sought to break out of the silos, reinforced by social media, that many of us live in. Nahdlatul Ulama is not merely inviting others to embrace principles of pluralism, human rights, dignity, and equality. It is proactively engaging religious and political leaders in search of a common ground upon which they can develop a crowbar for change. It's a strategy that deserves praise, even if in my mind, the jury is out on the effectiveness of its approach. Many Muslim religious and political leaders pay lip service to principles of tolerance, equality, freedom, human rights, and interfaith dialogue. Few, if any, have sought to enshrine those principles by reforming religious law and jurisprudence to eliminate provisions that are outdated and/or contradict these values, which they claim to be their own. Nahdlatul Ulama may be the exception that confirms the rule. In 2019, they issued a decree that replaces the legal category of kafir, or infidel, with that of fellow citizens. According to Nahdlatul Ulama, all citizens within a modern nation state are equal, irrespective of religion, ethnicity, or creed. Earlier this year, Nahdlatul Ulama called upon Muslims to abandon the long-held aspiration to establish a caliphate and instead to embrace the nation state as the fundamental building block of any order built on the rule of law rather than the rule of the jungle. To be sure, these are only first steps, but they are crucial first steps that deserve to be emulated, nowhere more so than in Israel and Palestine. The wanton killing of innocent civilians in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not only justified by appeals to national aspirations and security concerns. The killing of innocents, it often unconsciously is grounded in religious laws that justify and enable it. Thank you.
Thank you, distinguished panelists. Thank you very, very much for traveling the distances that you traveled, for responding to our invitation with such enthusiasm and alacrity, and thank you for your eloquent contributions to our theme of the R20 International Summit of Religious Authorities. In conclusion, I'm reminded of a story that's told about President Abraham Lincoln during the American Civil War, an extraordinarily violent tribal conflict that was also, of course, a conflict over a fundamental question of justice and injustice, namely the evil of slavery in the United States. In the heat of this horrific conflict, which killed hundreds of thousands of people, one of President Lincoln's advisors said he was grateful that God was on the side of the Union and that God was on the side of the North. To which Abraham Lincoln replied, "Sir, my concern is not whether God is on our side. My greatest concern is to be on God's side, for God is always right." It is a reminder, that story, that it's very easy to instrumentalize God and make God an instrument of our political agendas, our tribe, our nation, our ideology. But as Imam Yahya Pallavicini beautifully reminded us, God, the infinite, the almighty, he who is goodness itself, beauty itself, truth itself, can never and must never be an instrument to serve our narrow agendas and purposes. We must not try to recruit God to be on our side. We must be on God's side. And we are indeed deeply grateful to Kiai Haji Khalil Stakuf for his reminder to all the religious authorities of the world to ask themselves, are you on merely the side of your own tribe, or are you on the side of humanity? The humanity that was created by God to be blessed and to experience His goodness and His mercy and His compassion. It's now 1 o'clock. We are a little bit off schedule because of some changes in the program this morning. We will now have lunch and we will resume at 2 o'clock. We'll be able to recover time that we've lost in the course of the afternoon. So we'll have an hour for lunch. I will also say that we had intended to have a question and answer dialogue after this session, but because of the changes in the schedule, we won't have that now as the time is getting late. I think people need a break and need some refreshment and need to enjoy lunch. We will have a question and answer session built into our next plenary session, which again will begin at 2 o'clock. So please join me in thanking our wonderful panel once again, who began our discussion in a wonderful way. And again, we are most grateful to all the organizers of this summit, and we thank His Excellency President Joko Widodo for beginning our program, and again to Gus Yahya for his eloquent remarks this morning. So enjoy your lunch, and we'll see you in 1 hour from now. Thank you.
All
very
right,
much.
thank you, Mr. Timothy, and all the speakers. Please stay on the stage. There will be a token of appreciation delivering. So I would like to invite the chairman of the Central Executive Board of Nahdlatul Ulama. So please have your lunch and enjoy your break. Again, thank you very much for all the speakers and panelists. We have a photo session together. To all the speakers, come closer to Gus Yahya and give your beautiful and handsome face to the world. 1, 2, 3. All right. One more time. 1, 2, 3. All right. Thank you very much. Again, for all the speakers and also moderator and also absolutely the chairman of Executive Board of Nahdlatul Ulama that already delivered the token of appreciation. Again, we still have the plenary session 2. So be ready and have a good lunch and enjoy your break. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Dan perlu kami informasikan bahwa kita memiliki waktu hingga pukul 2 untuk menikmati hidangan makan siang, istirahat, dan menunaikan